Now I want to bring in Richard Haass, President Emeritus at the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of the book, The Bill of Obligations, The 10 Habits of Good Citizens. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Kristen. Good to be with you.
Great to have you here on yet another significant day of developments in the Middle East. And I wonder if you can tell us what you make of this breakdown of the temporary ceasefire. Obviously, Secretary Blinken was in the area. He was trying to extend the temporary ceasefire, and that did not happen.
In some ways, it was inevitable. You can almost be impressed that it didn't happen until now, so long as Hamas is still there. The Israelis have made it clear that their goal is essentially regime change, not just the military defeat, but the political defeat of Hamas. So Israel is going to continue to prosecute the war. And as you were just getting at in your report, it's a big issue now is how it goes about it. I think what you'll see, at least as important as whether there's renewed warfare, which again I think is inevitable for the foreseeable future off and on. It's going to be the question of how it is carried out.
Well, to that point, what, if anything, can the United States do to make sure that Israel is, in fact, as Secretary Blinken has said, enforcing what the secretary said would be a plan to limit civilian deaths? You heard Ali Rafa talk about those safe zones. How do they make sure, Richard, that the safe zones, in fact, remain safe zones?
Look, it's a big question. Obviously, the Americans, the United States, the administration is using its voice privately and publicly. If that doesn't work, then it becomes a really, really difficult moment. The question is, does the administration begin to potentially support certain types of action critical of Israel inside the United Nations Security Council? Plus, you're going to see moves probably in the Senate. You're already hearing stirrings among Democratic senators to potentially condition certain types of arms or say you can't have bombs of a certain size because those inevitably are going to cause civilian damage. So eventually we get into some very, very difficult areas for U.S.-Israeli relations.
What do you think at this point would need to happen in order for negotiations to resume, to release more hostages? Obviously, it's estimated there are more than 100 that are still being held, including several Americans.
Oh, it'll happen. At some point, one or both sides is going to want a respite, most likely Hamas. If it's getting hurt again, I think they'll want to slow things down. And that's why they took the hostages in the first place. The whole idea was to give them leverage, to give them protection, to play for time. So I think it's inevitable that we'll probably go back and forth between these pauses and renewed fighting. So I think that day will come again. Or the Israelis may also want a pause. If they're getting a lot of criticism for what they're doing, they may decide a pause is a better outcome than pressure for an open-ended ceasefire.
And of course, there's the big question of what becomes of Gaza once the fighting stops? Who will govern Gaza? And frankly, as you know, it's not just about governing Gaza. It's about rebuilding Gaza as well. You have President Biden, Secretary Blinken talking about a revitalized Palestinian Authority, but that presumably would take some time. How realistic is that? And also, I've heard a lot of talk about the possibility of an international force coming in. Do you see that as a likelihood?
I'm not sure there's the will to have an international force, particularly if Hamas is still there. That wouldn't be peacekeeping. That would have to be peacemaking. I don't think the world is going to want to do that. Palestinian Authority doesn't have the capacity, may not have the will right now. In order for them to get involved in Gaza, you would need all sorts of political assurances to them so they wouldn't look as though they were doing Israel's bidding. I think there's no chance that this Israeli government would give them those kinds of assurances. So I don't have an answer to your question. And more important, Israel doesn't have an answer to your question. They, in some ways, violated one of the rules of warfare where they've gone in, they're using military force, but it's not clear how you bring about war termination, how you bring about an outcome that would allow their interests to be looked after. And the answer can't be a prolonged Israeli occupation. But again, at the moment, it's not clear who authority could be handed off to. And obviously, you don't want Hamas to stay in power. So I can articulate the dilemma. But at the moment, I don't think there's an answer unless we see a major change in Israeli thinking, first about the use of military force, much more careful, and then about empowering the Palestinian Authority.
Really fascinating. As you look at these flare-ups of violence in the region, including in the West Bank, how much concern is there at this very moment that this could become a wider war?
Well, there's two types of wider war. One is the one people have been worried about, Hezbollah in Lebanon getting involved in, obviously, an Iranian instigation. We're seeing Iranian-supported proxies in Yemen shooting at American forces. So that's been that concern for the last 2 months. I think there's a different concern about the West Bank, where you're seeing settler violence against Israeli settler violence against local Palestinians, in some cases Palestinian violence pushing back against security forces or civilians. And that can really poison or further poison relations between Israelis and Palestinians. So either aspect of war widening, I think, would make a bad situation worse. But at the risk of being pessimistic, that's in some ways the modern history of a lot of the Middle East. Bad situations can get worse, particularly if they're allowed to drift. And I think that's why you see Tony Blinken as active as he is, Joe Biden as concerned as he is, because this is not going to get better by itself.
Richard Haass, thank you as always for your great insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.